Jack Armstrong III again, and we're going to have a little show and tell. Wrote a few things down here. Um, this is for Christy at War Games, Soldiers, and Strategy. I've been following Christy's painting tutorials, and they're awesome. And I wanted to make a thanks to one of her viewers, most likely subscribers, by the name of DB, about making it known that on the Artisan website they have color charts for matching Vallejo paints, which is what I like to use. As we all know, Christy uses the paints that aren't available anymore, especially to us here in the States. And some guy on there was telling her that the berets were all wrong. Now, Christy says, on the airborne troops, Christy says that she exercises artistic license, but I'd like to show you some cool pictures. I used to reenact airborne, and got some examples here to show you. So if you look at these berets in this picture, those are original wartime dated berets that those guys are wearing. And you can see how cherry red they are. Okay? And Christy and I were talking about through the comment section about the light color that she chose for the smocks, and she also mentions on there how effective they were in camouflaging the airborne troops in the wilderness. So if you take a look at my squad, I'm in there somewhere. You can't tell because we have our faces camouflaged, but look at the different shades in the different Denison smocks and how well the whole uniform blends with the surroundings in the woods. Very well. Okay, I'm going to back these away slowly. Now, let's talk about airborne berets to Mr. Non-constructive criticism, just telling her she's wrong. This is an original wartime dated airborne beret from the King's Own Scottish Borderers. They were a glider born regiment. It has the tartan flash. It has the brass regimental badge on the tartan flash. And yes, sir, this one is quite dark. But I'm guessing that maybe this wasn't worn in combat situations or in the field. This may have been reserved for simply walking out purposes. Here's another beret. This is a Canadian parachute battalion beret. No, I didn't convert it. It's a real Canadian parachute battalion because when I reenacted Airborne, Commonwealth Airborne, I did 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. And the Veterans Society of One Camp Para recognized us. We had 4 companies, 1 in Canada and 3 in the different regions of the United States. I was a senior NCO in that unit. I worked my way up from private. But this is one that was given to me by one of the World War II vets. This was his walking out beret. This was his badge, and yes, I haven't polished it for quite some time. But you can see it is also a darker shade than what Christy painted. However, it is lighter, more red in shade than the King's Own Scottish Borderers. Correct. So, setting this aside. And I'm back. So, this is a Brit Para helmet that I restored. So it's a reproduction, first, the early style leather chin strap, the liner, so on and so forth, with all the felt backups for when they, if they had a rough landing. Of course, this adjusts how far the helmet's going to fit onto your head. Simple string adjustment. And they also had some padding in here too. I didn't bother to put that in because I was just using it for reenacting, not actually jumping out of airplanes. But look at the tone. It is an original shell. It's not a post-war shell. It's kind of a light olive, and you can see the netting that you see the British Paras had on their helmets, as well as British infantrymen. You can see the difference in the shade. So my painting suggestion would be, you paint your helmet this darker olive, which I'm thinking maybe a Vallejo, if I say it right, match would be UK bronze. And then you lighten it somewhat or use a different shade completely and dry brush a lighter olive to get the next tone. On top is scrim. I read in my research, and hopefully Christy can, from War Games and Strategies, can verify this, as her husband had worked in the Arnhem Airborne Museum, because they live in around Oosterbeek, and the villages. His parents lived in the villages during the battle, so he knows that collection in the museum out and out. This is called what the Brits called scrim. The infantrymen used it too on their helmets, as did American infantrymen, American airborne, and of course British airborne. It's dyed burlap, or whatever material they may have had available to dye and cut into shreds and tangle and knot through the netting to break up the appearance of the helmet, to break up the sharp round shape. And yes, when they were in the field, they would put actual foliage tucked into the netting to further break up the shape of the helmet and give them better camouflage. Christy talks about the various shades of British khaki uniforms too. I believe this is a 19. Let me see here. This is a 1945 dated austerity pattern tunic that was manufactured by M. Berman Ltd., 18 Irving Street, Leicester Square, WC2. And you can see it is broad arrow stamped, ID to a Corporal Hill, size 12. That's your label, but just verifying that it is war dated. It's a 1940 pattern. The pattern before that was a 37 pattern with the pleated pockets and a little bit fancier tailored cut. As the war continued on, there needed to be cost cuts made and lots of uniforms manufactured. So they started making what became known as the austerity pattern, as well as the P1940 pattern, the P40 pattern. Pretty much the same collar and whatnot, but you can see this is more brown, very brown, more on the khaki side. The buttons are a Bakelite button, which were black. Now they're rubbed silver eye hooks for the collar, as you can see. Okay, still retain the epaulettes on the shoulder. Different things. This happens to be, when I was reenacting, I got really interested in the Royal Marine Commandos, so this is done up to represent number 45 Commando, Royal Marine Commando, number 45, where a majority of the commandos in that unit were airborne qualified. So they would wear the British Airborne wings on their right shoulder above their rank, and below their call out for their patch for the Royal Marine Commando. When they were airborne qualified, they did not wear the Combined Operations patch on the sleeve. The red on the shoulder epaulette indicates which company they were from, number 45. And then on the left sleeve, they did wear the Combined Operations patch. And you can see how bright the colors were. And these are embroidered on wool. These are earlier war. As the war dragged on, again, things became cheaper. And they were printed on like almost like an oilcloth. They were just like, I don't know if they were stamped or printed or how they did it, but it was like a rubberized cloth. There were no embroideries. They were no longer using the wool. But that's just an example of the different shades that Christy was talking about that khaki can come in. I've seen more green examples. I've seen ones that are almost a red-brown example. This happens to be mine. This is a war-dated pattern shirt that would have been worn underneath it. There's a misconception that most of them were like a brown wool or cotton flannel. This is war-dated, and as you can see, it's a little bit more on the gray-brown side as opposed to the chocolate brown side. Still has the light brown collar, but it's gray wool. It's wool flannel. Similar to the gray back shirts they wore prior to World War II, as like World War I and earlier. However, it is more on the brown side of the tone of gray. And we get down to the smock, where I mentioned to Christy that my smock had a more yellow tone to it than the one she painted. I did not tell her hers were wrong, because I've seen them that light, as I demonstrated in the picture that we had up. This is a reproduction Denison smock, supposedly made from, well, guaranteed, I have the paperwork for it, that it was made from leftover Denison material. And you can see that it's a little bit more khaki than, and a yellowish shade of khaki. You can tell the cloth is old. I only wore it for 2-3 years while reenacting, but you can tell the cloth is old because of the way it's aged. And the different shades of green within the greens, the different browns as they faded, like Christy was very perfectly representing in her painting of the 28mm Brit Para. It has a wool lining on the neck that would help with chafing, keep it soft. It does have, as Chrissy mentioned, they cut off socks and sewed onto the sleeves to keep them tight to their wrists when they were jumping. It does have the tail, or this would be buttoned like this when they weren't jumping, when they were walking through the field, just attached to a button. And then when they were jumping, this would button in the front. It would go underneath, between the trooper's legs, underneath, between his legs, underneath, and button in the front here to keep the smock from blowing up as he was parachuting out of his transport aircraft. That's enough on show and tell for Brit Airborne right now. Thank you very much.